I think now we're moving on to our next kind of more gritty bit. We turn from high-level policy to back to the gnarly mechanics of angel investment and exploring the role of tax in that space. I think we're going to focus on one particular aspect around employee share ownership plans. Last time at the tax summit, at the Angel Summit, as I said, it was a very popular session. On an almost daily basis, the IRD does balance the government's commitment to a flat and simple tax regime and supporting, at the same time, the aspirations of the business growth agenda. They're not mutually exclusive by any extent, but there will always be calls, as you've heard today, for special treatment. I'm delighted now to welcome Arlene White, who's Deputy Commissioner of Service Delivery at the IRD. Arlene is a relatively new migrant to New Zealand as well. She embodies all the characteristics of angel investors with optimism and enthusiasm. Thank you, Arlene, for being with us. After Arlene's presentation, we'll hear from Gavin.
Good morning, all. It's great to be here in such a beautiful environment and talk about what I think is the most exciting topic on your agenda, tax. Tax is my life. I'm a lifelong public servant and always in tax. I worked for the Canada Revenue Agency for 38 years before coming to New Zealand, and yes, I did start when I was 5 years old. Certainly the agenda, the topic that I've been asked to discuss today is the New Zealand tax policy, and just to give you a bit of a background on that. I feel a bit, I think, overwhelmed by the kudos that Minister Joyce and Minister Foss have given Inland Revenue, certainly in the last 2 days. But I would be remiss in not taking a bit of credit for the fact that the World Bank has rated New Zealand #1 in the ability for new businesses and new startups to develop here, and of course an efficient tax policy work program as well as good tax settings that contributed to that. And in this morning's Herald, it also talked about, I think it's called the Legatum Institute think tank has rated New Zealand #1 country in the world to actually live and work here. And they cite business opportunities, environment, governance, and policy as the reason we've moved up to #1. So I am very proud of that. I'm very proud to be a part of the system. If time, I only have 10 minutes on the agenda. Gavin's taken the whole time, as accountants do. Sorry, Gavin. But I would also entertain any questions about our business transformation program. And last night, as I was chatting with a number of you, I thought about how Inland Revenue is really a startup company. We actually are looking at completely changing the tax administration, and it is. We're starting from scratch, starting from base where we want to make a big difference. And I would suggest that the Minister of Finance is our #1 investor, as he has allocated $1.4 billion to Inland Revenue to increase and move our tax administration system into the 21st century. So let me talk a little bit about tax policy. New Zealand has adopted what is known as the broad-based low-rate tax framework. And I would suggest to any of you that are perhaps were around in the 90s when we, as the New Zealand economy, we were very much the same as countries around the world, where we had a number of credit systems and a very complex tax system, which was inefficient, very costly to run, and certainly never gave the government any certainty on revenues, as it was largely an unbalanced system in an economy and a small country such as New Zealand. Our tax bases are broad as possible, and that's the system of broad base. So no activity or form of payment, such as remuneration in shares, which Gavin will talk about later, is either advantaged or disadvantaged through the operation of our tax system. So this helps with economic distortions. It also keeps tax rates as low as possible as they tax a broad base. And coming from Canada, where it's a system of credits and handouts, and while I wouldn't call them bribes, because I am a good public servant, there certainly is a measure of that rang true for me when Sir Peter said it. I think a broad-based low-rate tax system ensures that taxes are fair, because as much as possible, all forms of income are subject to tax. New Zealand's personal tax rates, as well as its corporate rates, are relatively low by OECD standards. This is only possible because the tax base is broad. So reconciling our broad-based low-rate system with the business growth agenda, government priorities include supporting business growth, as Minister Joyce certainly pointed out to you yesterday morning, even though I wasn't here to listen to his speech. I have heard it several times. Now, Sir Peter also suggested that government should, some people have suggested to government that tax incentives would be a better way to promote business growth, especially startups and high techs. However, the most efficient way, I believe, and the government believes, and Inland Revenue is supporting businesses to maintain the tax system, is to help minimize compliance costs and the benefits that I've identified through the broad system. And I think what's important for me is making sure that we are the most efficient tax administration we can be, which then in turn can those financial gains to government so that they can invest in areas such as R&D. So, speaking about employer share schemes, and I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your hearts, and I will certainly allow Gavin to talk more about his impression of where we're heading with that. Arrangements providing shares and share options by companies to employees are an important form of employees' remuneration in New Zealand and internationally. And although the design and the accounting treatment of these plans have evolved considerably over the recent decades, the tax rules that apply to those schemes aren't necessarily as modern as they need to be. So New Zealand, in our tax policy program, undertook to review the taxability of employee share schemes. Now, they can have certainly economic impacts, and it's important that the tax rules do not raise unintended barriers to their use. In some circumstances, the current rules that Inland Revenue has can result in overtaxation. In others, they result in undertaxation. Now, earlier this year, there was a consultation document that went out, and again, the uniqueness of New Zealand is that we do have our policy people sit inside Inland Revenue, and we adopted the generic tax policy program framework in the 90s to ensure that any advice to government and to legislators actually comes after extensive public consultation. And I'm well aware that the Angels did respond to the consultation document that was issued earlier this year. I think tax, and I'm probably going to incite Ray with my comment as one of the issues that most offended him was our response to some of the submissions was certainly that the tax neutral treatment of employment income is very important to maintain the integrity of the tax system. Now, I don't know why he was offended by the word neutral, but he said that meant that Inland Revenue really didn't get what the Angels were trying to say. But I would suggest, again, going back to the higher order of the broad base, it's not just about tax neutrality, it's about tax fairness and ensuring that all income is taxed in the broadest sense possible and ensuring that everyone then is paying their fair share. Officials, certainly we, and myself included, are aware that ESS is an important form of remuneration, especially for startup companies. Therefore, there's been the consultation, and we've gone out with a subsequent paper, subsequent to the one that was issued in earlier this year. Again, we know that the Angels have met with our tax officials several times over the past several months to discuss what it means for startup companies. I would suggest that certainly the unique issues that you've identified have not gone unnoticed, and we have paid attention to your submissions. We have earlier this month issued our advice to the minister, who will be sharing that the measures identified in the policy paper and introducing legislation early in the new year. I can't really say much more than that now. I do know what the advice to ministers has been given, but as always, we will leave it to them to make the formal announcements of what and how the tax of employer shares will change, or how it will be administered in years to come. I was asked last night about the deductibility of investment, the $100,000 to $200,000, why it isn't tax deductible. And I had quite a conversation with several of you in this room about why there isn't just a straight tax deduction for the investment that you make on a cash basis. And we talked a little bit about what it's like to have a capital gains tax in a country where I've come from in North America. At large, those deductions are while looking good on the surface, when there is a gain and when you have to declare it as income and pay tax on that, it's not looking so good for people any after that. So it's not just a straight tax deduction like people assume it is in other countries in the world. It does eventually become taxed, and at a much higher rate, I would suggest, as in Canada, I paid a flat rate of around 48%. Paying a much reduced rate here has, in my opinion, a better administration, and as I said earlier, contributes to the economic and social well-being of New Zealanders by having a broad-based low-rate tax system. So that's my pitch about the broad-based system. I do believe that we are administering it as well as efficient as possible. Certainly our business transformation has already identified huge savings that we are passing on to small business in New Zealand. So people mentioned Rod this morning, and Rod and I got to know each other about 4.5 years ago when I landed in New Zealand, as he certainly challenged inland revenue to help out small businesses, to work with the private sector to encourage a more efficient tax system. Earlier this year, we finally were able to implement a suggestion that Rod had been nagging me to do since I got here, and that was allowing for our GST returns to be filed straight through the software package that small businesses use in starting and using their and fulfilling their compliance obligations with inland revenue. It's been a great take-up. Both MYOB and Xero have offered it to their customer base. We're seeing huge gains in the industry, in small businesses who are reporting to us that they're saving an inordinate amount of time in doing their tax affairs because they're getting certainty and accuracy in their filing records with us, and they no longer have to worry about us chasing them when they can just do it from their simple software package. So that's again my pitch for business transformation, why we are ensuring that we recognize what compliance burdens do to small businesses, especially startups. We are also mapping what tax means to small business. We found out some interesting data that, believe it or not, when companies start a business, tax isn't the first thing they think of. I just don't know why that is. I thought it would be right up there on their agenda. But in mapping that journey for small business, we've brought a number of startups into our organization to just talk to them to say, okay, so how can we fit more into your life as opposed to us enforcing our will upon them. They've given us some great insights, and that's, again, what our transformation is all about, looking to the private sector and public-private partnerships to make sure that our system of taxation remains fair and consistent, and that we acknowledge what a great country New Zealand is to live and grow business in, as recognized worldwide now in our #1 standing. So, it's probably 10 minutes. Gavin.
So I was dreading being the first tax person up on the stage after all the motivating speakers in the last day or so. But it's nice to follow Arlene, who's quite obviously passionate about tax. I've spent my career last 20 years in tax, but of more recent times it probably only occupies sort of 20 or 30% of my time. So coming back and sort of doing a tax presentation is back to the future a little bit for me. But employee share schemes. Suze keeps hyping my presentation or our presentation from a couple of years ago. I'm not entirely sure it was the technical nature of the presentation, rather probably Ray's involvement in the presentation that everyone seemed to enjoy. So we'll see how we go. But I'm just sort of reflecting on how I'd unpick this sort of topic for an audience like this in a way that might make it useful. And I was really struggling because in many ways, when it comes to implementing these schemes, I'm sure you guys have had more experience at the coalface than I have. And I'm struggling to get this to, there we go. So this isn't rocket science, of course. These are generally the reasons why we try and we implement employee share schemes. I think from a practitioner's point of view, these are employee share schemes have been those sorts of things that have bubbled away in the background for a lot of years that get quite a bit of press and hype around them, particularly in the startup space, as being something that most startup or early stage high growth businesses kind of need to have to attract and retain the right talent. But when you started, particularly before the changes to the legislation, Security Acts legislation and things like that a few years ago, it was really very difficult to implement a scheme that was easy, that wasn't costly, that aligned the incentives of the people you were trying to employ and retain in a way that made sense to the business. I think we're seeing a lot more activity now with employee share schemes because of those changes. So, they're back on the radar screen, particularly for a lot of, established private companies that are looking to do things like succession planning, but even in that sort of early stage high growth. I think where we've sort of found that we've spent a lot of time up front sort of thinking about a design of the scheme. Often our clients are moving quickly away from any sort of structured scheme and moving, thinking about sort of bonus schemes and things that align to liquidity events and things like that. So you're able to entice the right staff in a way that allows them to share in any sort of liquidity event without having to go through the structure of an employee share scheme. But where we are seeing the employee share schemes being implemented, I think there's a sort of a view that simple's best. So, at that early stage sort of end of town, we're still seeing very simple schemes being implemented. Obviously, at the other end of town, in large corporates and things like that, you start to see more sophisticated schemes. And I think some of those schemes tend to be some of the issues that are, we'll go on to talk about the IRD's changes, but some of the schemes that they were starting to sort of look at and get a little bit more interested in terms of the way income was perhaps being deferred off, or the schemes were being created to try and switch what would otherwise be taxable income into capital gains. We were seeing more and more instances of that at the large end of town rather than in the startup community. Recent discussions with client of mine who's developing products in the data analytics space, having to attract data scientists, very highly paid elsewhere, developing software products in the data analytics space. Went through this sort of discussion again. They've sort of gone down that bonus route with some sort of bonus payable on liquidity events. So where are we? I think, for years we were sort of, as advisors, advising on these schemes with very little coming from the revenue. So there was the sense that the revenue was becoming a little bit uncomfortable with some of the schemes that were out there, but hadn't really given any steers on perhaps where they were heading and what they were thinking. And then in the last couple of years we've had quite a bit coming out. We've had in 2015 there was a risk review, or risk alert I should say, it's the type up there, but a risk alert that the IRD has now started to issue from time to time statements where they think there's things going on, structures being put in place, arrangements being entered into that they're feeling uncomfortable with. Last year they issued one around employee share schemes that they thought were starting to push the boundaries a little bit. As you know, the examples that were given in there were particularly, it was sort of, well, in our view, sort of to the extreme, but gave a good example of where they saw schemes trying to put in place where there was ownership of the shares were being transferred, but the or legal ownership, but not really the economic ownership, was being transferred to the employees. The economic downside, if you like, for the employees was being deferred off to a later date in an attempt to allow the employee to benefit from any capital upside but not take any sort of capital downside through those schemes. There's also a product ruling around a chorus scheme that was issued also that gave a good steer as to where the IRD's thinking. So that scheme had a lot of the similar sort of features, but in IRD's view came on the right side of the line as opposed to the wrong side of the line of those examples given the risk review. I'll go into a little bit about this reporting and collection attack because we work with the association around a few submissions on that, and but this is around the ability for employees now to withhold tax on employee benefits given to employees, and that's now will apply from 1 April next year, and then we'll touch on some of the proposed changes, just conscious of time. So simplifying collection of taxes. There was a real, and this is, I guess, part of our experience too with dealing with businesses with employee share schemes, particularly at a relatively early stage. There's a feeling from the IRD that perhaps benefits that employees were receiving that they needed to account for through the provisional tax regime weren't being returned. And that's often because the provisional tax regime, if you're in the PAYE regime and that's your experience of returning tax to the IRD through salary and wages, that all of a sudden you've received a benefit through employee share scheme, actually getting your head around the provisional tax regime, mate, is not particularly easy. And we've worked with clients to make sure that where they've done that, we've been available to provide advice to those employees. But the IRD went out for consultation to see whether there was to ask for views on whether those benefits should be returned through PAYE or through FPT or some sort of withholding tax. Where we've ended up with is a set of rules that say for an employer is able now to elect whether or not they withhold benefits through employee share schemes as they're realised by the employees. But it's only an option. So the employer can opt in a particular scheme. So all the employees for that particular scheme they would withhold. So it's not on a employee by employee basis, but a scheme by scheme basis. They can come in and out of that, so it's revocable. It's not a one-time only thing. So that's an option. I think it's useful for those situations where employees feel like they're in a situation where their employees might struggle to comply with their tax obligations. Obviously, there's a cash cost to that, and that's the big downside. That there's somehow you're going to have the cash to withhold and return to the IRD. And I think in our experience, that's probably going to be the biggest issue for employees, and particularly the early stage business, and the reason why they probably won't go down that route. I think the alternative, or where we've seen that employees in that sort of space dealing with this issue particularly well, is they'll ensure that their employees have somewhere to go to for advice to ensure that they meet their obligations. The one thing that is mandatory, though, is where you do, as an employer, provide a benefit through a scheme, you're now required through your employee monthly schedule to identify that benefit and to pay to the employee. So the IRD is getting visibility over those benefits being paid to the employees now, whereas in the past they weren't. I don't know, Arlene, if you've got any particular comments about that. Cool. Moving on. So these are the more substantive changes. These are the consultation process that Arlene referred to. So we're very much still on that consultation process. Had 2 papers so far, an officials paper earlier in the year and a follow-up consultation paper in September, I think. And I think submissions are now closed on that. As Arlene said, we're looking forward to legislation in the new year with an implementation somewhere off in perhaps 2018. So a wee way to go yet. So I guess these are the sort of broad areas that were touched on, and we can rattle through some of these. Unconditional share purchases. These are really share schemes that are set up where there's no conditions attached to either the shares being sold or the options being issued. The current treatment is well known to everyone probably in the room, so we're paying tax on shares in that situation where we've got an issue of shares between the market price and whatever the employee contributed to the scheme, so the difference being taxable. And similarly, in the option scenario where an option's been issued, tax is paid on the difference between the strike price when the option is exercised and the market value at the time. IRD is comfortable with that tax treatment, and so no changes at this stage have been proposed. I guess the major sort of feedback through that process was that, in some elements, there's always been a discussion around whether the tax, particularly with options, should be, or the assessment point should be at the issue of the option as opposed to the exercise of the option. And I think there was quite a bit of feedback through the consultation process around that. I know, a lot of other jurisdictions have various scheme or rules that allow for options to be valued at the time that they're issued and under various different sort of scenarios. But to Arlene's point about simplicity and broad base and all those sorts of things, here in New Zealand we don't sort of have those rules, and there's obviously no appetite to sort of go down that route through that consultation process. Okay, the major changes are with what coined conditional or conditional share schemes and option-like share schemes. And I think this is where most of the contention was around the proposals. Going back to Arlene's sort of initial comments around trying to ensure fairness, the underlying sort of policy principle through the document is that the IRD's view is that these schemes are largely trying to provide employees with remuneration and should be taxed in the same way that other salary and wages should be taxed. So the amount that is taxed and the timing at which they are taxed should be the same. Now I think that sort of perhaps isn't widely shared by everybody. I think there was quite a few submissions on the basis that there is a capital element. So to Marcel's sort of point before, that in many respects when we go into these sorts of schemes, what we're trying to achieve is an ownership of the employees, so that they're sharing in the upside as a capital gain that founders or other shareholders may share in a tax-free capital gain as opposed to monetary remuneration. But the IRD's view is they've held firm to the view that through these processes, employees through these employee share schemes, they should be taxed as monetary remuneration. So what the rules are trying to, the new rules are trying to ensure is that the taxing point arises when the conditions on the shares or the options have been satisfied. So what we're trying, particularly with the option-like share schemes, this goes back to the sort of the chorus and the type sort of schemes where you've got a bunch of conditions around employment and whether they're held in trust and they won't vest, and you've been purchased through a loan. So all those sorts of features where economically the employee doesn't have any exposure to the downside of the company not performing. So as I say, the proposals are very much aimed at ensuring that the taxing point is when all those conditions are satisfied, and the employee is then sharing in the economic upside and downside of that particular share or the option. Few sort of technical issues that still haven't been worked through, but I think that's the nature of the consultation process. A lot of those issues won't really be, just conscious of time, so we won't rattle through those, but there's a lot of detail to sort of come through. And I think Much of the, outside some of these sort of more framework type issues that I've touched on, a lot of the nervousness for particularly, the lawyers and accountants in the room is around some of this detail. But that's just the nature of this consultation process. We won't really see some of this detail until the legislation's issued. So the following consultation paper actually was quite useful in the one that issued in September, and I think a couple of areas. One, reconfirming the IRD's commitment to this approach to employee share schemes, but also made some comments, much more stronger comments about the taxing points around that unconditionality of the share schemes and options. And if you've got time, I was going to rattle through some examples, but I don't think we've got time. But if you're really interested in kind of understanding the practicalities of how these rules bite, they've got a series of very good examples in there as to how they think they will apply in different scenarios, particularly in sort of where you're deferring off the vesting of the shares dependent on the employee working for a particular period of time for the company.
You've got a startup company and you're 4 or 5 founders.
Yep.
Startups are notoriously unstable. All the founders don't stay. And so you want to make sure that the founders that stay and grow the business, especially as angels, because we're putting the money into the business, we want to make sure that they benefit from the business going forward and not the people that leave. But you don't want them to vest their shares in this business they founded 100% on day one. You want that to vest over a period of time so that any leavers don't dilute and hold shares back from the original founders.
So keep the mathematics simple. Imagine you've got one shareholder.
Pass them up.
Imagine you got one shareholder, right, and you give them 50% day one, right? But then you want to have that incentive for the rest of the shares, so you vest that over 4 years, which is common in the industry and become much more common because of these problems of the fall. But of course, you don't want them to have a tax liability as that organization grows because they've literally given you the company and you're giving them back. So I guess Trevor's question, if I understand it correctly, is as the way it's set up at the moment, that would still stay the same, that as you're vesting this back into that, they're not going to carry any tax liability forward as the organization becomes bigger and more profitable. Is that correct or not?
So as I understand the rules, I don't think they'll impact on those founder vesting schemes. I don't know if anyone else has got any particular views on that. Yeah.
As well. It was quite a spicy discussion, but we did get there in the end.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't think they will. I think there is a risk, particularly around, shareholders being employed in the business. That you'd need to make sure that you're clear about that scheme as opposed to the employee share scheme that you were putting in place to incent
startups, founders.
Yep, absolutely.
Early founders.
So my understanding is it won't impact. But again, that's the sort of detail that we will only truly understand once the legislation.
That's a really important one.
Absolutely. But as I understand, and from that's not the policy intent at this stage, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe Arlene might like to comment on this too. But it was where we got into more robust discussions again was around the notion that Marcel raised about the fact that very early employees are tantamount to founders. And so how are we grappling with that? That one we're still kind of working through a little bit, but we will get there. Arlene, you might like to comment.
No, I couldn't say it much better than you did, Suze. Those considerations were all part of what we recommended to ministers. And again, I'm not at liberty to say exactly what will come out in the legislation, but those were very well presented by you and your team.
Thank you. Has anybody else got a question? Yeah, Rod, go.
Is there anything we can do to give the kind of benefits to overseas staff? So because of the no capital gains tax here, it's very good for New Zealand staff. Though of course, we're not building these businesses for capital gain. It's not really income. But for those staff we have overseas that get trapped in overseas jurisdictions, is there anything that we can do to protect them in the same way that our local staff would be? Because as you get bigger and bigger, that becomes much more of a problem, and that would be a great way to keep New Zealand companies listed for longer.
Not sure I have the answer to that question. I mean, that's a particular issue, for...
It's not an issue, it's an opportunity to create more value in being a listed company and keep the environment here. I think the world's getting more global, and if you look at valuations between Australia and the US, they're almost the same. Mm-hmm. So there's not a huge amount of benefit other than the kind of brand benefit. So if we can invent some reasons to stay listed longer, that has to be good.
Yeah. No, I take your point.
They don't necessarily take into account the complexity of the offshore environment. And a lot of work has to go into making sure that if there is going to be a gain that's taxed, that it's taxed under the offshore capital gains provisions and not revenue. And I think in any early stage company putting in place an employee share option plan, they've got to be very cognizant of the fact that the rules aren't going to be the same in each country. And so to your point, and to others, global from day one is going to mean more complexity than probably what's involved in the New Zealand system.
Put a scheme into a few companies where you merely extend the exercise period out for like 10 years so that all the early staff that have been given options, they wait for a liquidity event, shares vest, they exercise them. There is a taxable event, but it's just income tax. So, and if they choose to leave the company, they've left, right? They can exercise at that point and carry the risk of private shares and get the capital gain tax after that. So, this doesn't elude tax, which seems to be a common objective. I think an employee can quite happily pay tax if they've got the cash to pay it.
Yeah.
So putting a long exercise period.
I think that was a topic of a lot of the submissions. Is there's no real desire here to avoid tax. They're at the margins. I guess we want to ensure that there might be a capital element to some of these gains as opposed to be taxable remuneration. But those issues, two of the biggest issues are one around valuation. How do you value a lot of these companies? And there's a significant cost, for our clients that do have these schemes in place. It's a yearly valuation exercise, which isn't cheap. And the other is the liquidity. How do you pay the tax on what is largely a liquid asset?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I think we get into the engine room of this stuff, but it's there are actually some very powerful levers in this area. So. On the one hand, your eyes glaze over, but on the other hand, it's really important to understand, the power of these levers. And generally, the option scheme and the regime around that in New Zealand is pretty clear cut. Yeah. No argument, and where the gains fall or not. And I think one of the reasons that it's, the attention, has been, it's got the IR's attention is that at the high end of town, there's a lot of sort of dancing around the scheme. There's a lot of creativity. If you ask for some suggestions on option schemes, you get 20, 30 different scenarios. And I think that's messy. So this is an opportunity to sort of simplify that, for all players. I'd like to thank Arlene and IR and also Gavin. We've had tremendous engagement with the folks who are really getting their heads around this, the startup space, that founder piece and then leading into growth and some of the contention that happens there, particularly around valuation. Because you end up talking it up on the one hand and talking it down on the other. I've had schemes in the States, where you do have to formally value, your option regime, and they tend to value them incredibly low, and then you have to explain back to the shareholders in New Zealand why they invested in the last round at 10 times what it was valued by the the E40 or EB40 scheme in the US. So I really think it's very. I do appreciate the fact that you've been able to put some of those things aside. I'd like to put a call out for Andrew Simmons as well, who's put a lot of time and effort into this. And Andrew, the people at IR think you're a sensitive new age guy, so so you've obviously really come across very well. So thank you, folks.
Great, and I'd just like to endorse that too. Andrew's works with over 400 startups in this kind of space, so and I wanted to kind of back that up too. You make sure you lean on, as angels, you lean on these professional service providers. We are doing, some of us, deal by deal and are trying to build a portfolio, but our professional service providers who support us in this space, they're kind of playing the portfolio game too and working with us. And so, and they see more deals, they see more activity, they have some really great insights into this. So thanks, Andrew, endorse that big time.